Hi guys, Olive here today to tell you what I read in October of 2018. It's been kind of a weird month and also a difficult month. First and foremost, I've been robbing Peter to pay Paul a little bit in terms of focusing so much on getting ready for Nonfiction November, which if you would like to join us, it is not too late. I will put all the information for you down below. But I've also had to deal with some other hard things this month. An annoying thing that recently just happened is I got sick 2 days before my birthday and had to cancel all of my plans. It's just kind of representative of how the year has gone so far for me. But then the day after my birthday, as you may have heard, there was a massive, deadly hate crime in my city of Pittsburgh, in a neighborhood that I know very, very well, that I love very, very much. And you think you know what it's going to be like when that kind of stuff affects you, as it seems it's going to affect all of us. And as much as it breaks my heart every single time it happens, it's indescribable when it happens in your own city, in a neighborhood that you love. Because it does more than hit close to home. Like, this is home. I have lived in Pittsburgh for over 6 years now. I love it here. I feel extremely connected to the city and its people. And for this to happen in a neighborhood that is so inclusive, so loving, it is one of the safest neighborhoods that we have here in Pittsburgh. For something like that to come to that neighborhood, it's been very, very hard. I tell you all this because I do not exist in a vacuum. I do not cease to exist when I am not sitting in front of this camera. I am a real person. I go out into my community. I work every day. I have friends. I have responsibilities. I have other hobbies. And something like this that just absolutely hits to the core of our community and makes us come together in a way that I am so incredibly proud of. It has a really deep impact on me, and it has since this event occurred. So I've been dealing with that and trying to pick myself up off the ground and keep going and trying to figure out how to best support this wonderful, beautiful community that we have in this city. All the spare energy that I have at the end of the day goes straight into pouring all my love and attention into trying to make Nonfiction November as wonderful as I can for all of you. It's made extra difficult by the fact that I am once again going to be traveling for work. As I did in the spring, I'm working really, really hard to make sure that it does not affect any of the content that is going up on my channel, especially in a month that matters to me as much as November does. This is definitely a bigger life update section at the beginning of this wrap-up video than I do normally in wrap-up videos. I like to go straight into talking about the books. But this kind of thing, you can't expect it to not have a big impact on me. And if you would be so kind, I really do not want to see any comments that have to say things like, I don't want politics or negative stuff on BookTube. Whenever I see those comments around the internet, I immediately start to think that the person who is saying those things isn't fully understanding that the person who is talking about something like that doesn't really want to be talking about it, because I don't want this kind of thing to happen to anyone, much less members of my own community, people I may have passed in the grocery store, at the library, right? Those individuals who lost their lives were my fellow Pittsburghers, and their families are my fellow Pittsburghers, and I will be damned if I do not show solidarity. To all of my fellow Americans watching, please vote on November 6th. Okay, since we now have a lay of the land, I would like to get back to what this channel is all about, which is talking about books. So let's get started. The first book I finished in October was The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. This was one of the books off of my 10 most popular books on my TBR list that I wanted to get started on reading this year. This is probably Erik Larson's most well-known work of nonfiction. This focuses on the Chicago World's Fair of 1832, also known as the Columbian Exposition, that was held in order to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus's arrival in the New World. He discusses the initial conception of the fair. He talks about the individuals who were involved in planning it. He talked about what spectacles it had on offer and also the public reaction to it. Simultaneously, he also discusses the actions of conman, fraudster, and serial killer Dr. H.H. Holmes, who was committing his crimes around the same time period. Now, it was my impression through the synopsis of this book that the story of this murderer was a lot more connected to the World's Fair than it actually was. I feel like the summary kind of implied that Dr. Dr. Holmes in some way used the World's Fair in order to be able to commit his crimes, but that was not the case. In fact, I thought there was very little overlap between the two different stories being told, that of planning the fair and that of Dr. Holmes committing his crimes. I personally found Holmes's story about 10 times more interesting than the details of the planning of the fair, but in general, I kind of loathe event planning. I didn't have a wedding, FYI, so that was not my favorite thing to read. And so much of it hinged on political red tape and then architecture, and I'm just really not the reader for that. I will say that I did love how he painted the picture of what it must have been like to attend the fair, since none of us are going to have that option. And also he talked about the long-lasting impacts of the fair. Several different products and things that we know really well debuted there, such as the very first Ferris wheel, but also everyday products like shredded wheat. But at the end of the day, I thought the two different threads of stories in this book were way too disparate to be woven together, and I thought this author at times could get way too carried away by detail. The next book that I finished in October was Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. This was a pick off of my Classics TBR that I had put aside specifically for October in order to read it for Victober, but as one of you very kindly pointed out to me, in fact, Jane Austen is not a Victorian writer. I did not know that. I know now, and I appreciate being informed because, guys, I can't win at trivia if I'm allowed to continue with incorrect impressions like that. This is the penultimate Austen novel that I had left to read. I only now have Mansfield Park left unread, and in this book we follow Catherine Morland, a sweet, naive young woman who is invited by some wealthy friends to travel with them to Bath. There she becomes acquainted with two different families, the Thorpes and the Tilneys. She very quickly strikes up a friendship with Isabella Thorpe, who is the love interest of Catherine's older brother. Catherine herself becomes the love interest of Isabella's brother John, although Catherine is not interested in him. Her interest lies exclusively with the quirky but also very lovable Henry Tilney. As you may expect, things get complicated when all of these families intermingle, and more so than in any other book I've read by Jane Austen, she makes some really seriously acerbic observations about societal structures in her day. Catherine makes a really sympathetic protagonist because she's so impressionable and so pure in her nature that you just can't help but to excuse all of her shortcomings because she means so well, just knows so little. Her saintliness is proven by her friendship with Isabella, who is so annoying. Oh my god. I did really enjoy this. I found it to be the snarkiest among her novels, which is definitely appreciated, but also, I thought Henry Tilney is the most appealing of all the love interests that she's introduced, at least of all the books that I have read so far. He is dependable, he is constant, he's a realist but also has a really great sense of humor. He appreciates Catherine for who she is and isn't afraid to tell her how much he admires her for how pure-hearted she is, and I found that really lovely. But I do feel as though I need to say that I found this the least romantic of all of Austen's novels. I definitely didn't love it as much as I loved Pride and Prejudice, and maybe not even as much as I liked Persuasion, but I feel like this one is solidly in third place. The next book I finished in October that I would like to talk to you about in this video is called Diving for Seahorses, Exploring the Science and Secrets of Human Memory by Hilda and Ylva Ostby. This is a book that was just released this month in October. A few months back, I actually requested this book from the publisher Greystone Books. About a year ago now, they reached out to me asking me if I'd like to receive any review copies from them because they liked a review I did of one of their other books, Birdmania by Bernd Brunner, that I did last year. I ended up choosing this one from their catalog because memory is always something that has absolutely fascinated me. This is, as advertised, an exploration of human memory, more specifically as it relates to the region of the brain known as the hippocampus. This region of the brain first acquired its name because it struck the anatomist who first discovered this region of the brain as resembling a seahorse, and hippocampus is the Greek word for seahorse. This book is a somewhat abbreviated look at memory that is told, as most books on memory are, through case studies about memory and through exceptional cases of memory. The most famous one of these is a case that you may have even heard of before. It's about a young man who was known in science texts up to the point of his death exclusively as HM, was given a later to be discovered misinformed treatment for epilepsy when doctors removed both of his hippocampus regions. As a result of this surgery, he completely lost the ability to form new memories. And While I understand that scientists learned a whole lot about him and it's almost impossible to write a book on memory without mentioning him, I feel like I read about his case in every single psychology book that I ever read. I did appreciate that the authors used his case study to talk about working memory versus long-term memory and what happens in the brain to convert to the one type to the other. And although the authors of this book do discuss people with exceptional memories, they are very quick to highlight the trade-offs that those people have in their lives to be able to live with such memories. And in fact, I found this book to be a celebration of the average memory and how spectacular just the average memory is. They stress the normalcy of forgetting things. The brain has to forget things. It can't store everything all at once, just for efficiency's sake. So it has to make decisions about what to keep and what to get rid of. And this book does a great job in detailing just what makes one thing stick and other things fade. This is a book that I would recommend, but if you are interested in picking it up, I do have to tell you that since the art copies were released, this book has changed titles. I was actually lucky enough to attend a talk given by the Osby sisters, which was very entertaining, but when I went up to go and meet them and say hi and buy my book and have them sign it, they talked about the title change with me because I told them I was a reviewer who had an art copy, and they said that it was because of Barnes & Noble that they were forced to make the change. I sensed there was more of a story there, but I didn't want to intrude. So if you are interested in picking up this book, know that it is now titled Adventures in Memory. Moving on to the next book, this is a book that I have done a video on, but haven't actually discussed yet. I know that's confusing, but I will clear that up in a minute. That book is Walden by Henry David Thoreau. This is a classic piece of nonfiction in which Thoreau details how he, for just shy of 1 year, lived in a house that he had built himself alongside Walden Pond in Massachusetts. And there he lived and supported himself as independently from society as he possibly could. He made that decision to divorce himself from civilized life to be able to go out into nature and learn about life in its essentials. He wanted to leave the complications of his former life behind. He wanted the opportunity to commune with nature, and he wanted to be able to learn some life lessons that he could take with him through the rest of his life and pass down to us through his writing. I originally intended to read this book in June when I was doing my annual reread of my very favorite book, Rules of Civility by Amor Towles, because this book plays such a big role in that book. In fact, the main character, Katie Content, calls this book the only book in which infinity can be found on every other page. But when I first started reading this in June, I was approaching the end of a very long stint of traveling for work. At that point, I was over it, lonely, ready to be home, ready to be back with my husband. And so when I started reading this when I was drinking alone in a bar, I was kind of just like, yeah, I'm not in the right headspace for this right now. So I decided to save this book for a trip that I knew we were taking in October to go down to a lake to spend some time with my family. And that proved to be a much better reading experience. I was surrounded not only by nature, which is totally appropriate for this book, but also by my family, by my loved ones. It's so funny discussing this book because I feel like half of it is moving and insightful, and the other half reads like a woodsy live journal entry. I think there's a reason that quote from my favorite book says that infinity can be found on every other page, because there's definitely a lot of detail in here that you simply don't need. Like, for instance, he gives a very, very thorough account of his expenses when he was living in this house that he had built on Walden Pond. And I know that this was probably intended to preempt his critics, who he probably imagined as saying, well, how did you afford to do something like this? But those numbers that he so carefully provided mean absolutely nothing to a modern eye because of inflation. But when he gets going on the meaning behind what he's doing or what he learned from the experience, he will come up with passages that will absolutely take your breath away. And that's what makes this book infinitely worth reading. If you would like to sample some choice selections from this book, and or you appreciate my speaking voice and would like to experience for the very first time ever on this channel me doing a voiceover narration for a book, I will link the video down below that I did of me narrating portions of this book alongside some footage that I took when I was on vacation. I was nervous about how it was going to turn out, but I'm really happy with it, and I hope you enjoy it. And the last book that I finished in October is one that I have talked about at length. That is The Witch Elm by Tana French. This is the very first standalone novel from the author of the extremely successful literary thriller series, The Dublin Murder Squad. In short, this book is all about a golden boy's fall from grace and how a skull ended up in the hollow of a wych elm tree. It is a book that I was able to appreciate more after the reading experience than I did during, because I was able to see what she was doing as a whole. I not only did a full video review for this book, which I will link for you down below if you would like to watch and hear all of my thoughts on this book, but I also was apparently in the mood to all at once try to prove to you guys or myself that I am not a one-trick pony. And so I did my very first ever written review for Open Letters Review on this book, which I will also link for you down below. And if Steve gets his way, as I'm assuming he will, that will probably not be the last written review you will see from me there. So those were all of the books that I read in October. Not quite as successful as I would have liked, but as I said, I am pouring a lot of my time and efforts into Nonfiction November. Since today is November 1st, it is finally Nonfiction November. So from today until December, I will be reading exclusively nonfiction, and I cannot wait. I would love to hear from you in the comment section below if you've read any of these books, if you've heard about them, or if you're interested in reading them now that you've heard me talk about them. And as always, if you'd like to connect somewhere other than YouTube, I am on a variety of different places on social media, and the links to all of my profiles are linked in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.